But yes, for today and the tea that we're going to drink, there's a handful of things that you'll want to have at the ready. So hopefully this was familiar from the email, but just to remind us all, just as a good cue, if you don't have these things, maybe to go grab them. We'll need hot water, and we want it to be as close to boil as possible. So hopefully in a way that you can reheat it easily. We're going to be drinking black tea. So we sent off packets with 2.5 grams of Assam black. Hopefully people have those. If not, 2.5 grams of any black tea will do. If you're wondering how much 2.5 grams is, this is a little pre-measured amount. So it's about a tablespoon. And what we'll talk about more is the ratio of the tea to the steeping vessel, which we'll also want. If you have a steeping vessel, if it's not a cupping set, which is what I'll be using, you just want something small. So basically the idea is that the amount of tea that we have is about half the amount in grams as the number of ounces of the steeping vessel. So I know that's a little wonky, but that means, 2.5 grams of tea would go with a 5-ounce cupping set. And the reason for that particular ratio is to really bring out as much from the tea as we can. So some kind of small pot. Of course, we'll want a cup. And if you want to be fancy, then you can have a spoon, ideally a fairly wide one that is more of a soup spoon than, what are the other types? Teaspoons? I forget. The broad ones. Interestingly, we don't want teaspoons for this. We want fat spoons. And then, yeah, as a palate cleanser, some kind of cracker or any small, fairly flavorless snack. Other examples could be peanuts or carrots, or, well, carrots aren't as good. But ideally, anything that's the only seasoning that might be present is salt, but we don't want any sweets or spicy things, and that's just to refresh the palate. And then I'm always, whenever I've joined these kind of events, wondering, like, when do we get to drink tea? How much talking is there versus the tea? So we will be doing some talking initially, probably about 15 minutes worth. So if you want to drink something in the meantime, go ahead and pour yourself a cup. I've got a cup myself. If you really want to have the purest experience, then I would suggest not drinking anything and keeping your palate as clean as possible. But it's also a Saturday morning, so being flexible there is important. Okay, so that's the list of things that we will need for today. Just before I move on, does anybody have any questions about what you should have with you? Please come off mute if you'd like to. Okay, cool. And while this is a formal tasting that we're talking about, I was talking to my sister like an hour ago about this, and she's like, "What are you doing? Is it a lecture?" I said, "No, this is drinking tea on Saturday with friends." So as a reminder, this is the formal process, but hopefully not a formal experience for us all. Okay, and yes, as an announcement on the bigger picture, happy fall to everybody. The equinox is the official marker of the beginning of fall, and here in Michigan, where Mitra and I just moved last month, it set in almost exactly on the equinox. So I hope that everybody's enjoying whatever kind of sweater weather you've got going on, or not. If you don't have that, I'm sure it'll come soon. And as a reminder that we do these workshops quarterly, we try and align with whatever the seasonal celestial excellence that's happening is. So the next one will be mid to late December. We're trying to line it up with whatever Saturday is the closest one to those big events. And for this particular workshop, I wanted to thank 2 people who have helped me a lot in my own study of tea and understanding of the cupping process. The gentleman on the left is Mr. Nigel Melican. He's a very renowned tea consultant, and we had the pleasure of being able to travel with him 2 times across India on tea tours that we had organized, and he was teaching us about tea on the way. And that's him in Darjeeling, cupping about 7 or 8 teas in a session and talking us through. And a lot of what we'll share is stuff that I've learned from him. And then the other person who's been really influential in helping my understanding of tea is the guy on the right. That's Mr. Mo Sardella with the G.S. Haley Tea Company, which is based out of Redwood City, California, in the San Francisco area. And yeah, he is just a wealth of knowledge and a lot of fun to drink tea with, because he can talk about tea in this way that's eloquent and artistic, also grounded and practical. And so, yeah, I've learned a lot from him and want to thank them both for helping really create today's conversation. Okay, so we're going to be cupping tea. Cupping is the formal evaluation method for looking at tea. This is kind of different than the other style of drinking tea, which is just for enjoyment, which is 99% of what we do normally when we're drinking tea. This is the 1% of the time where we really want to dial in to focus on exactly the flavors that we're experiencing, the aromas, the mouthfeel, and the textures of it all. And overall, the experience of cupping is oriented around making the tea stronger than what you would want to do for enjoyment, but not so strong that you can't taste anything except the kind of astringency. But the idea there being that with a cupping, we're preparing the tea in a way that will pull out everything that the leaf has, so we can kind of look for imperfections in the experience, as opposed to just elevating just the parts that we like. And the way to do that is by controlling the 4 variables that we have in making tea. The amount of tea leaf itself, it's about 2.5 grams of tea. And all of those, Assam packages that we sent out were pre-weighed to be exactly 2.5 grams. The amount of water that we use, that's the 5 ounces. That's the standard size for a cupping set. It's 150 milliliters. Oh, sorry, somebody else has joined the waiting room. Let me let them in. And the temperature of the water, as I mentioned, this is going to be right off of boil, so hot water. And then finally, the steeping time, which is 5 minutes, which is a little bit longer for a black tea than we would typically suggest. Normally it's 4 minutes, but pushing the extra minute in and having that higher leaf to water ratio gives you, again, more information that you can extract out of the tea leaf. So this is the cupping process. We'll talk about in a second what the actual cupping set looks like. But I wanted to share that, this isn't just some kind of small random event, but these cupping sessions are actually very central to the way that the tea that we drink today reaches us. It's the way that every tea factory that I've ever been to in India or Nepal or Sri Lanka or beyond that people have talked about always have these cupping sets. This is the way that any buyer who goes to a tea origin gets to try the tea. And it's always the funnest part of the experience. And this is down in the Nilgiris in South India. This is at the tea studio, and it's probably the most picturesque cupping area that I've ever been. So I thought we'd include that. But it's not only in the tea factories that this happens. This is also a staple of brokerages. And I included this picture because we've got Brendan Shah with us today. And this is a picture of us doing a cupping in Kolkata. A whole bunch of teas. This picture doesn't actually do this justice, but this table, you can see there's about like 20 here. And then beyond this next table had another 150, and it's a room full of these things. So the really experienced professionals are doing hundreds, if not thousands of cuppings every single day, or cupping thousands of teas every single day. And that takes a different type of endurance, let me tell you. As you can imagine, drinking that much tea would lead to a caffeine overload. So traditionally, you can see here just below Amit, there's this kind of silver ring. That's a formal spittoon. It is one of the more interesting parts of the process that after you hold the tea in your mouth, you actually spit it out. I'm not going to suggest we do that today because let's enjoy the tea rather than get rid of it. But if you were going to do a couple hundred in a row, that's probably what would make the most sense. And then, finally, cupping, it's definitely something that as you work your way into, you'll find different levels of kind of, how to put this, like different ways that it kind of challenges you and stretches you. And so I don't advise this, but if you do feel particularly risky, you can do, trick tasting. That was all trying to be a build-up for this joke. But this is a picture, also in actually Darjeeling, of another cupping session. And just a reminder that, yes, this is a formal evaluation process, but it's also supposed to just be about drinking tea, and that should be fun. Okay, so with that, let's actually move into getting our tea ready. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. And now, through the power of the future, I'm going to switch cameras and show you the cupping situation that we have here. Let me try and spotlight this for everybody. Okay, so I'm going to start by turning on the water. So if you've got your kettles, this is the time to get it hot and walk us through just what we're talking about when we talk about cupping. So this is the cupping set. It's kind of a 4-part process. We have the steeping chamber, which is this kind of cup-looking device with a lid. I've already put the tea in that we'll be drinking. This is the 2.5 grams. You can see it just kind of lightly fills up the bottom of it. Again, this is 5 ounces or 150 milliliters. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about this, if you are working with a cupping set yourself right now, is that the lid has that little hole down there at the bottom. And that's to aerate the tea as it pours. So you want to always make sure when you're putting it on that that hole is as close to the handle as possible, because it's actually going to pour out this side. And you want to have a good circulation of air to allow the water to flow. So that's what's here. I've got the 2.5 grams in it. Here's the cup itself that we'll pour into. That's pretty self-explanatory. The main thing with this, or with any kind of cupping cup that you want to use, is to make sure that you're using something that has a white interior, ideally white ceramic. And that's because the color is a really important part of what we're looking at when we're drinking tea. So to have something that doesn't have any kind of like dark black or rocky interior is important. A lot of times, you know, the outside can be fancy, but the inside we want it to be as white as possible. And then traditionally, the way we do it is also with a spoon. So as I was saying, like a nice wide spoon so that you've got enough of a base to bring a fairly good amount of tea up so that you can taste it. I'm going to now pour the hot water on and then start my timer. And then we can go from there. And here's the tea that we're going to be drinking today. This is the Assam Black from Chardwar Estate, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second. But this is the setup. So, ladies and gentlemen, start your engines. I'm putting my hot water into my tea. I'm filling it up, and then I'm putting the lid on with, again, the little hole facing as close to the handle as possible. And the timer is running.
Raj, how full do you fill it?
5 minutes. I'm sorry?
How full do you fill the cup?
You fill it all the way to the top, as close to the top as you possibly can.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's actually one of the things that Mo, that gentleman was showing in the beginning, he critiqued me on, because I was pouring, we were doing like 5 or 6 teas and I was doing uneven amounts. It's like, no, you've got to get them all as close to the top as you can.
And Raj, the tea is in the cup or not right now?
Yeah, sorry, I had already prepped it. So I would put the tea in the cup first.
Okay.
On top of it. Yep, thanks for that.
Okay.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, are folks using cupping sets today, or are you using some other way of making your tea?
I'm using the one you sent me.
Oh, excellent. Okay, fun. I'm glad that we've got cupping sets.
And what's the timer for? How many minutes?
That's 5 minutes.
Okay.
We're off and running. I can see steam drifting up through the screens of many people. Oh, yeah, Dave, that's a very nice teapot. The flannel sippers. Oh, okay.
Yeah, the flannel sippers take this seriously.
Yeah, I
Got
can tell. Excellent. Any questions about the kind of approach to cupping that we're talking about? Has anybody done this before? Maybe raise your hand. Is this familiar to people, or is this a new time? Is anybody doing a cupping for the very first time?
I am.
Oh, awesome. Oh, how fun. All right. That's great. I hope the first of many. Okay, well, while we're steeping, I've got another 2 minutes and 43 seconds to go. I've got a little bit more that I will share. It's always a little interesting to jump between the different cameras. So much technology. Okay, here. Hello, I'm back. I'm going to share my screen. And okay, we are steeping now. Oh, there we go. Okay, so once we pour out this tea, what we're going to do is look for a number of things. One is the taste, which is broken up into two things: the flavor, that is actually what we experience on our tongue, and then the other is the aroma, or the fragrance, that we experience with our nose. And it's very interesting. It was actually not till I had done a cupping myself and kind of got taught this, that those are two pretty independent experiences that collectively form what we call taste. So that's one part, the taste. The second is the mouthfeel. This is the weight of the liquid on the tongue. Sometimes it's called the texture, the heaviness of the body. And for a lot of teas, for example, white teas, which are my favorite style of tea, they're actually, the taste is very delicate, but the mouthfeel is quite heavy. So you might have an experience where there's a tea where you might say, oh, it doesn't have a lot of flavor, but wow, it sits on my tongue. It's creamy. And that in itself could be a very desired quality. So mouthfeel is the second. The third is the finish. So after you've swallowed the tea and are letting it sit on the back of the throat, there's often what we call a returning sweetness, or this wave that comes after. And that experience is also a desired and very controlled and sought after part of what tea makers are looking for. And then the other part with cupping especially, that is different from when you're just drinking tea for enjoyment, is to really take time to look at the visual. And that's looking at the dry leaf itself. So before the tea is steeped, and some of the things we're looking for there, the uniformity of the tea particles to see, has this tea been well sorted? Is it all roughly the same size, so it'll steep at the same rate? Is there the presence of buds, which are the terminal growth of the tea plant that really give the tea its higher end qualities? And those in a black tea become a golden fleck. And we can talk about the naming ceremony. I mean, the naming system that's developed around really the presence of that bud, which is also referred to as tips. So that's all in the dry leaf. And then in the wet leaf, after it's steeped, to look at the way, it's actually a really interesting thing. Oh, sorry, I gotta stop for 1 second to pour out my tea. And just to do that, what I'm also going to do is show you, too much technology. I was gonna show you the pouring process, but I'm gonna have to just do this and then come back. 1 second. All right, I'm pouring out my tea. And probably everybody else's tea will be ready in about what, 20, 30 seconds. So we'll just give it a second. And it is not a bad thing to let the tea cool off a little bit before tasting it, both because right now it'll probably burn our tongues. And second, because actually a lot of cupping is intentionally done at different temperatures. And so actually sometimes tea tasters prefer to taste the tea when it's cold or room temperature, because once it's cooled off, it's sort of, that's the most revealing version of what it is. Sometimes the tea is good hot, but once it cools off, you get like, whoa, where's all this astringency coming from? So letting it cool off is not a bad thing. But yeah, we were just talking.
Raj,
Yeah.
sorry, can you show people how to pour the cupping, because it can be a little tricky? Just bring it up, maybe.
Yeah.
Just,
Yes.
we can.
Stop sharing again. Let's switch cameras. All right. Is everybody seeing that? Okay. So yeah, I have poured the tea out already. But so this is the cupping set. And so when you're pouring it, thanks, Mitra, this is a good thing to point out. It's going to be hot and full. So the best way to do it is to put your finger on the top and hold it from the side. And then you tilt it over like, let me back it up further still. You pour it like this. And so the tea itself is pouring through the little teeth that are at the front edge of the cupping set. And you want to pour it till all the drips are out. The hard part is because the lid is, it's not like glued on there, to make sure that you're holding it with a finger to balance it and push the finger down as it's going. And the other important part is, again, to remember that the hole on the lid is on the same side as the handle. And that's important because otherwise the tea kind of bubbles out rather than pour smoothly. How did it go for everybody? Was it a smooth pour? Did anybody have the experience of it falling off and getting a hot splashy mess on your table? Because that's not that uncommon. Okay.
Are we pouring the whole thing?
All of it out. Yep.
I sometimes like to just rest the pot inside the bowl and let it drain out on its own.
Yeah,
That's a little bit easier for me as someone who does drop the teapot quite frequently.
Yeah, so what Maddie's suggesting is like this style of once you put it in, just letting it sit there and dripping out, because it can get a little hot to hold it while it's emptying all the way out. The real hot doggers, like they just use one hand and just kind of go like boom. But then your hands are really pretty close to it. So I like to use two hands. Okay, has everybody poured out their tea? Has anybody not poured out their tea yet? Okay, great. So why don't we just taste it? And one of the things that we do when tasting tea is not talk or not describe it, because whatever any one person says is going to influence what everybody else experiences. So first, let's just taste it, and then we'll talk about it. And when tasting it, what we want to do is hold the tea in our mouth. And the way I was just learned to do it is to move your tongue east and west and north to south through the tea. So you want to have enough tea in your mouth that you can actually like hold it. You don't want a small amount. And you want to do it in a way that gives you the ability to really taste everything. So what I'm going to do, and you can join me with a spoon if you'd like, is to just take a full spoonful. And then the tradition is also to slurp. So it should be a loud process. And the idea there is just with wine, you're aerating the tea a bit to get some oxygen in, which actually brings out some flavor. So you're allowed and encouraged to be on your worst slurping behavior here. Ooh, I really like this tea. And again, the things that we're paying attention to are the flavor, the way the taste on the tongue is, as well as the aroma or the fragrance, and so the smell of the tea. We're also looking at the color of the tea in the cup itself. Another thing we're doing now, and usually I actually do this in the beginning, but is to smell the wet leaf. So if you just crack it open and breathe in the aroma of the wet leaf, that's often my favorite part of the experience. Oh yeah, you get a lot of different top notes that are also part of the overall experience, but not necessarily something that you actually drink. One of the things that's fun to do is when you're smelling it is to not open the lid too much, but just crack it open so you can get a bit in. And that's so that if you want to come back, if you're doing a bunch of teas at once and want to pay attention to the aroma a second time, you haven't let off all the flavor. As well as if you're doing this with a bunch of people and each person's going to want to try it, you don't want to hog all the fragrance to yourself on the first inhalation. What's it called when you like a lungful of breathed air? I don't know how to describe. I think you know what I'm trying to say. So let's do that one more time. And when we're breathing in the aroma as well, it's a full inhale and a full exhale, and you actually get a lot of the aroma on the exhale. And then let's just take another spoonful for ourselves. All right, now let's talk about it. And the rule of talking about tea is that there's nothing wrong. Everybody's experience, this is a very subjective thing, taste. And while there are like different categorizations, and we'll pull up a flavor wheel to look at some words we can use to describe it, it's often most fun just to say, what's the first thing that stood out to you? Was there like a specific memory it triggered of a particular food type, or was there something that stood out, like, whoa, the amount of astringency, like I could taste the tannins on it, or was it just the aroma? So please come off mute and pitch in. What did you experience as you were tasting that? It's always scary to go first. I do know that experience too.
Comfort.
Comfort. Okay, yeah, which is a fun thing, right? It's not just the flavor that we're experiencing. There's also the emotions that are connected to taste.
I don't have a lot of, go ahead.
It's like this, I don't want to use the word smoky because it's not smoky. It's like a little s, like a more of a just an even
Yeah.
talking about smoky, but not really smoky.
Yes. And that those qualities can be very intentionally included in the tea making. And those are usually picked up in the drying stage at the end of the processing, which is the final step that kind of stops the process from continuing. So yeah, that's great.
Taste is somewhat elusive to me.
Uh-huh.
However, the first thing I noticed reminds me of the few things that there are out there, which I can tell it's just cleansing my mouth, getting rid of everything off my tongue, off the walls of my mouth. Everything else is going out down the drain, and then just the tea is left.
That's great, Jim. Yeah, and like the full experience is sort of, it doesn't have to be related to using just words that, you know, you hear kicked around, like a bouquet of roses or stone fruit. It can be whatever the experience is for you. Maddie, what did you taste when you were drinking this?
I'm drinking some old Nilgiri Beauty. And it said that there was star anise, notes of star anise, and I'm like trying to get that. There's some spice in it. So that's what I've been trying to pick up. It's a lot lighter than the Assam, so I think our flavor experience is probably pretty different. But yeah, it's gorgeous. Definitely apricot-y and nice lighter black tea.
Yes. Did anybody notice anything in the aroma as you're smelling the tea that stood out to you?
I had a pretty big pumpkin smell for the aroma itself. Like when you freshly carved that pumpkin during like the Halloween season, that's what I mostly got.
That's awesome. I haven't heard that before, but what you're describing totally makes sense. Yeah, kind of like a gourd, like the pumpkin. There's a little bit of sweetness, but then there's also like the kind of meaty texture of the pumpkin as well. Yeah, I smell that. And here's the interesting thing that we've also talked about as a team a lot is once somebody says something, anything, all of a sudden the power of suggestion sets in, like, oh yeah, I can totally smell that, or I can totally get that. But what's often the funny case is like when somebody's like, no, I don't get that at all. But I get the pumpkin cake. And it'd be interesting, you know, we're in fall now. If we were to taste the same tea in spring, would we still taste the pumpkin?
I kind of noticed that the taste it's getting sweeter as it cools.
Yes. Yeah, and that's very much what you're after. That's a sign of a good tea, that as it cools, you're getting different flavors that are still continuing to be enjoyable. And that's, yeah, and when we say good tea, that's a combination of so many factors, including the cultivar, the elevation that the tea was growing at, the time it was plucked, how it was processed, how it was packed. But that's a very positive thing, that if as it cools, you're continuing to enjoy it in new ways. That's what we're after.
I can't smell the aroma of the tea, but when you had us smelling the tea leaves, I was very pleasantly surprised that I could smell them, and it's a very pleasant earthy smell.
Yes.
So that, to me, that's the taste of the tea in my mind.
It's more the aroma than the flavor.
just because they can't really taste too well.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, and then one thing we can also do is if you have the cupping set, you can flip it over. Make sure your hand's under it because it will drip a little bit, and then just kind of whack it a few times. And that puts the tea leaf onto the lid. And this is usually what they do as well. So I'm gonna just tilt the screen for a second. So you can see what the wet leaf looks like. And what that gives you a sense of is a better insight into when the tea was harvested, the size of the leaf. And generally, the younger the leaf, the smaller it is, the better it is. So if you can make out the shape, and with this particular tea, which, Assam teas, they're intentionally made to be very strong. So they do break up the leaf more, which allows more flavor to come out. But what you can get a stronger sense of was how large was the leaf before it got broken up. So this is one of the more picturesque things that you'll see. And I'll share the screen again to look at a little bit more. It's really cool when you see like a wall of these next to all the cups, because there's to be honest, like I feel like my experience is that there's a little bit of the theatrical element of the whole part to tasting tea. That's kind of part of the enjoyment of it too.
Raj, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Connie. With Assam tea, I also use the cut and dried version to cook chai.
Okay.
To cook masala chai.
Yes.
And I don't know if you plan on talking about this, but I was just curious why they're a different, preparation. What do they do to these tea leaves to make it the form that I use for cooking versus steeping?
Yes. Yeah. Happy to talk about that. But I hadn't planned to, so I'm going to go a little off the cuff. But basically with Assam, well, with any kind of production of tea that comes from the legacy of the British, so that includes all of India, most of Kenya, most of Africa, most of South American produced teas, there's two primary ways that tea is made. One is this style, which is called orthodox, which intentionally kind of preserving the shape of the leaf to a high degree. It requires a lot of human input in the processing, the post-harvest part. And it's made, again, using just the newest growth of the plant, the bud and the first two below it. So that's orthodox. The second style is called CTC, which stands for crush, tear, curl. And that was a method that was developed in the 1930s, 1940s by a Scot. The Scots have a really important role to play generally in tea in the modern world. But that style of tea is kind of like, are you familiar with like Rune Goldberg machines? Where like you do one thing on one part, like you flick something, then like half a mile later, something else happens. That's kind of the way that the CTC factories look like. There's a lot of manipulation of the leaf, and it's done with machines. And that's done to really break it up as much as possible so that everything will come out when it's steeped. And then it gets pelletized or made into like granules. So like the metabolic. And I'm guessing that's what, when you're cooking, that's what hopefully is the style.
Exactly. Yeah.
You never want to have by itself. That style of tea is intentionally made in a way that is supposed to be added flavors to. So the idea is really to treat, in that scenario, tea is primarily an ingredient. Several ingredients that's getting used. So you want more of everything to come out.
I see.
Orthodox, it's more intentionally done in a way that you might add some milk or sugar, but even if you want to drink it by itself, it should still stand and
okay.
So
well, thank you. Yeah.
CTC are the two ways that Assam tea is made. And for chai or for cooking, you'll want CTC, and you'll know it. They're like small balls.
Right. I do both. When I cook chai, then it's the other kind, and then when I steep it every day for breakfast, it's this one.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
All right, well, pulling us back into the tasting world, one of the more challenging things is to learn how to talk about tea in a way that feels accurate, especially when it comes to flavor. So I just dropped in the chat a link to a flavor wheel that we found to be a pretty good one. And I'm going to share my screen again because I've got that same, the same tasting wheel saved. And give me 1 second. Yeah, so this is the flavor wheel, which is a very helpful way to describe the experience of the flavor and the aroma. This doesn't get into mouthfeel or finish or the visual, but at least as it relates to the words that, for example, we include on the tasting notes of all of our teas, this is how we come up with them. And so you kind of work your way from the inside out, where you say, okay, is this tea on the highest level? Does it remind me of fruit? Or does it remind me, say, of something more floral and flowers? Or is it something planty or herbaceous? Or is it more earthy? And so you kind of make that first determination and work your way out. Okay, it tastes earthy, but is that more of a forest type of earth, or is it more of a woody type? And then you then make your way all the way out to the outside. And so these are all different words that are common these are different ways to describe flavors that are very common in tea. So yeah, this is just a good resource and a good way to find a common language around tea. For example, I think it was Maddie who mentioned that she was tasting some apricot. So that's a type of stone fruit. So and she's drinking a tea from the Nilgiris. She's not drinking the Assam right now. So you might have that's a very common flavor to come out of those types of teas. So that makes a lot of sense. At the same time, one of the things that Madeline on our team, who is Jim's daughter, Jim who's with us today, says is that for her, a lot of black teas taste like raisin. And so that's a common flavor as well that we often taste in black teas. I'm actually not seeing raisin on here. But it's an example. I guess it's like grape, and so it's there. But yeah, a lot of times we find ourselves often using the terms that are on the floral direction. A lot of this plant and herbaceous flavors come out if you're drinking green teas. If you're drinking pu'ers or oolong teas, that often have a lot more of these earthy notes. And then black teas are often more on the fruity side and sweet side. So yeah, just to offer this as a resource and to say that on that website as well, I thought they did a nice job of describing the different ways that you might put to words the mouthfeel part, creamy or heavy or light, the texture of it. Is it papery? Is it thin? Or is it more thick and viscous? And yeah, it's just a fun process of using those words to just deepen the experience, which is really, I think, ultimately about just being able to drill deeper in, right? To be more present with the tea by really paying attention to the fine details that we might otherwise just gloss over if we're drinking it while in, doing work or whatever it is that pulls us away from really being present with the tea. And this is posted on the Path of Cha. I don't actually know the people behind it, but it was a good resource, so I thought I wanted to share. And then just a little bit about the tea that, oh, sorry, was there anything there?
Do you tend to land on really just one of the flavors around this wheel, or would you, maybe have for a particular tea, maybe a little bit of the tropical fruit, maybe a little bit of the sweet, maybe even a little bit of earthy in one particular tea?
Definitely, yes. Much more the second is what we're trying to pull out. If it's a one-note tea, if it's kind of a flat, boring tea, it might just have one of these. But for example, for me, this tea that we're drinking, there's definite fruity notes. I do get some of that pear, or not pear, the raisin part of the grape piece. But then there's also a bit of the woodiness. It's a little bit smoky, and you taste that as well. For me, there's like a bit of a creamy finish that's kind of in this milky category. So you might be tasting different things and kind of synthesizing all together. This is how we can describe. And again, it's not just the way it tastes on the tongue, but also the aroma. For me, that's where a lot of that milky creaminess comes out. It reminds me, like I smell it and I think of like hot chocolate. So I think it's really best to try to find more than just one dimension of the flavor, by, of the taste in using this. But really, it's also quite difficult. It can be a kind of a challenge to figure out ways that are consistent. And so I can say when we're making our tasting notes for our teas, what we do is drink it as a team and then kind of independently all write down what we are drinking and then compare notes and see if we can come to some sort of, not consensus necessarily, but agreed like majority for describing the teas. Cool. I think this is the last slide that I actually put, which is just to talk a little bit about the particular tea that we're having today. This is our organic Assam Black, which comes from the Chardwar state. Assam is the name of the tea producing region over here. You can see in the eastern part of India. The Brahmaputra River, which kind of starts up in the foothills of the Himalayas and runs through and empties out into the Indian Ocean, is what irrigates and kind of creates Assam. It's, as a region, it's a very fertile valley. It produces about 40% of all of Indian teas, and it's regarded as the most productive tea region in the world. And the British developed Assam in the 1830s and 40s. And when they did, this is where they introduced a lot of the methods and practices that kind of synthesize what traditionally was done with China with developments from the Industrial Revolution, and bringing those two together allowed for a pretty unparalleled explosion of productivity. And so India went from not producing any tea commercially to outpacing China as the world's #1 producer in just 40 years because of the techniques that were developed in Assam. Sadly, the human part of developing those techniques was such that the farmers themselves who were doing the work of growing the tea were not treated very well. And so this particular state, Chardwar, the people who run it, they're the ones who helped fair trade establish their standards for tea when they came into India by what was happening in their gardens. And so, yeah, the reason we're excited to work with this garden and to bring these teas in is not only are they organic, and we hope you feel high quality, but the people behind it are really trying to shift the way the farmers are treated on these larger operations by doing things like including scholarships for students, different types of healthcare, intentional education programs around women's reproductive rights. And also environmentally, they're doing a number of things that are kind of pushing the envelope. They're in the process of securing the first regenerative organic certification for an Assam-based tea estate. And again, yeah, they're certified organic. And I'll make one last plug for the folks here at the Chardwar estate. At Young Mountain, our work is really focused in this region, Kumaon in the north, where we're helping to set up a farmer-owned tea factory. The people in Assam have been incredibly generous in providing guidance and even supply chain development. So they helped us figure out how do we get the tea from this region out into the port. And so, yeah.
Raj, I have a question.
Yes, please.
This is Connie again.
Yeah, hi, Connie.
First of all, I have been to Assam and I just absolutely loved that part of India. It was such a lovely part. We went up to Bhutan too, but what makes it organic in India? What are the components? Like, I know, in the United States, to make something organic, it's quite a bit of labor with terms of all the gates, one has to go through.
Yes.
How does organic how is it established in India when it comes to growing tea?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's the same set of standards.
Okay.
Same criteria. They're called the NOP, the National Organic Program. This is a global set of standards that to sell into the US as certified organic, a producer has to meet. And at the highest level, that means, no insecticides or pesticides.
Okay.
Any part of the process. And also no synthetic fertilizers or input to the tea growing that come from artificial sources. Those are the two biggest buckets, but there's a ton of other ones as well. And actually, this is kind of, you're asking this at a particularly juicy time because India and the US are going to war right now over organic certification standards, and the US stopped recognizing a lot of Indian organic certifications. So it's actually a pretty big moment of transition for a lot of governments now to figure out how
Thank you.
directly to the US to get that certification held. Yeah, and Gigi, I think you had a hand up too.
Yes, I was just going to ask, what are the growing conditions like? What's the weather like? What's the elevation like?
Yeah, Assam as a region is comparatively low elevation. So the Himalayas, or Himalayas, however you want to pronounce it, kind of start right to the west of most of Assam and then run this northern line. And in fact, it's a mountain range that's still going up, fun fact, as the Indian subcontinent subducts under Asia. So it's the roof of the world and it's rising. But Assam is not really that high elevation. There's basically two parts to Assam. They call it Lower Assam and Upper Assam, and that's basically by the elevation type. This is from Upper Assam, which is generally more highly regarded because the tea plant is one that is very susceptible to root rot. So if there's any standing water, then it often kills the plant. And because these are floodplains, and this is Bangladesh right down here, yeah, a lot of Lower Assam is getting hammered right now by saltwater intrusion and flooding that's pushing water further up and into the tea gardens. And so the combination of having just healthier root structures as well as a little bit of elevation, which puts stresses on the plant that are actually good for the flavors that we're after, results in it being, yeah, slightly higher quality if it's typically from Upper Assam. That's not universal. There's certainly really wonderful gardens in Lower Assam and really, not great teas coming out of Upper Assam, but generally climatically, it's a little bit more favorably positioned. One of the things that is interesting about the growing conditions of Assam is that with climate change, making those issues of saltwater intrusion and flooding more and more an issue, is that there's predictions about how long Assam as a region can continue to even exist. Some of the most dire ones, which are actually put forward by Mr. Nigel Melican, that gentleman who we mentioned in the beginning, are that by 2050, Assam won't be growing tea at all. And some of the more, I mean, it's a fairly nuanced thing. It's definitely not going to be the whole region going under, but we can definitely plan around there being some pretty significant changes in the coming decades as a result of these changes. And what predictions are is that will push tea growth generally into more northern latitudes, where it's a little bit further from some of the most direct impacts, but every place is getting influenced. And I should have mentioned as well that kind of what defines Assam teas are their strength, whether that's made like the CTC style as we're talking about, the punchiness, but also their maltiness, and that's that toasted grain or cereal notes, which I should have mentioned when we were talking about flavors, are also there for me when I drink it. But it's also a conversation that all the old guard says, oh, none of the teas from Assam are malty like the old days. So it's also something that's changing, and we'll continue to watch it change because, yeah, this is a living plant, and it's, I think, a representative of an ecosystem that's experiencing a lot of shifts.
And I find that when you cook the tea in the CTC fashion, the maltiness is a little bit more evident.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're going to get a little bit more of everything that's in there. So yeah, by like boiling a CTC style tea, and that's the only kind of tea that you can comfortably put into boiling water and keep the water boiling. You would fry the leaf with a lot of other styles, but because it's been made to handle that, you do get different flavors.
What are the main threats to Assam's feasibility for tea?
Primarily this rising sea level, because so much of it is at, if not right at sea level, then slightly above it. And yeah, tea being very susceptible to root rot, like its roots just don't like to be wet. That's the biggest one. So the flooding that's happening as well, flooding and seawater rising are the two biggest ones. Which is, yeah, and unfortunately, there are people trying to figure out solutions. like figuring out cultivars of tea that are more flood resistant or less susceptible to root rot, but that takes decades to develop. So these are long-term solutions that we need to figure out in addition to the short term. In the short term, they're like doing things like digging more ditches into the estates themselves to allow for more water to run off. But it's kind of a challenge if the whole region gets flooded, which does happen. Sorry, I didn't mean to pull us in such a dire direction. But I think it is important to recognize that, yeah, these are shifting and challenging times as well. And for now, this is a beautiful tea, so we can enjoy for what it is and for the people who are making it for us. Okay, that's the end of my slides. I'm going to stop screen sharing unless there's anything else that anybody wants to look at again. And if so, we can just chat. Ooh, Gigi sharing some great things. One flavor, the flavor was very helpful. On first tasting, I got tobacco and astringent. It felt heavier at first, but as it cools, it gets silkier. And tasting it as it cools, yeah, again, that is one of the more fun ways to see the evolution of the tea. And one thing we might do is, I'm going to, is steep the same leaves again. We did it 5 minutes the first time, which again, that's a stronger steep than you might normally drink for enjoyment. But let's just do 6 minutes and get crazy. Steeping it real. That's right, the flannel sippers. Matt is saying, I find tea texture always gets better as it cools. Really interesting. Definitely.
Raj,
thank you for these tasting notes of cardboard and concrete as well. It really rounds out the flavor. I'm hoping those are jokes.
hey Raj.
Yeah. Hey Wendy.
I want to thank you for that wheel, the flavor wheel, because over the years of tea tasting, I've had trouble articulating what I'm tasting.
Yeah.
And looking at that wheel will make it a lot easier. So thank you so much for sharing what, I've taken a lot of tea classes and nobody's ever shared that before.
Oh, good. I'm very happy to hear it. Yeah. And I don't know if you scrolled down on that website, but I think the way they describe mouthfeel is also really good. Yeah, does it dry the mouth or is it astringent? Or sorry, those are the same thing, mouth drying or astringent. Those are two ways to describe the same experience. Is it tart or tingling, brisk or crisp, delicate, light or light bodied? All of those are really helpful as well.
Gotcha. Well, I think that you have vast knowledge of tea. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Oh, cheers, Wendy. Thank you. We're all students. All right. Jim's filling up the peanut gallery with more. Mandy's asking, during a factory cupping, would you typically brew a second cup? No, it's one and done usually in the factories, and they would brew it fresh if you wanted to try the tea again, which always feels really wasteful to me. Looks like my mom's doing something similar. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Mom, you're saying something, but you're muted. But no, in the factories, they don't do the second cupping.
No, I said this was great, and I'm having tea and masala dosa.
Okay. If you haven't had the pleasure, is a South Indian style of, I won't say crepe because I've said that before and got scolded. But it's brown rice and lentil batter that gets put onto these griddles, and it does taste very good with black tea. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say generally about Assam is that because of that malty, strong forwardness, I find that if you're having it with any kind of dessert, it pairs very well, especially if the dessert has any kind of butter or dairy product in it. There's something about the tartness of the tea that really brings out the flavors of whatever sweets we're having. So when we have desserts, we always have it with Assam.
A quick question about the second steep.
Yep.
So, all the young mountain teas can be steeped a second time, but is that true for all teas?
Definitely. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Well, any tea that I suppose is made well. But generally speaking, we always steep a tea at least twice. Well, we try to. Sometimes there's too many teas to try. But yeah, the Camellia sinensis plant that makes blacks, white, green tea, oolong, it's all the same plant that makes it all. The leaf often has more than just one steep in it. And okay, because my mom's a chemist, she might call me out on this a little bit. But what I've understood of it is that the water solubility of some of the compounds, it varies. And so sometimes it has to get super saturated before it releases flavors, and sometimes it all comes out in the first steep. So you can fact check me on that one, but I can say that generally teas should be steeped at least twice. I had another thought there, but it drifted away. Don's asking if you can get your mom's recipe for dosa. You'll have to talk to her.
I have another question, but I don't want to take up all the time.
Connie, I think we're here to chat, so please.
Okay. So I'm going back to India in February. And in the past, when I've gone to different tea estates to taste the tea, for me, I've been to India several times, but traveling as a Westerner with a Western belly, it's really important for me to take care of my belly.
Yep.
And I pretty much stick to bottled water in India. Yeah. And sometimes I've gone to these resorts where they have some kind of a very fancy tea tasting corner, and they're using kind of like an osmosis type water.
Yeah.
And it's never worked for me in terms of my, my system. It really only works in terms of the bottled water. And I was wondering if you could give me some, just a quick orientation to if we do go to a tea tasting event or ceremony or corner, is it appropriate for me to ask them to use bottled water in the preparation if it's not what they ordinarily use?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely appropriate to ask.
Okay.
Especially, I would say 90% of the places that I've been, people are very understanding of the fact that not just Western bellies, anybody's bellies can get put through the ringer in India. And it's definitely a smart safety protocol to use bottled water. And also for tea tasting, a lot of times if it isn't been filtered in some way. And then I'm surprised, it's unfortunate to hear that the reverse osmosis hasn't been enough. Hopefully they're also boiling the water, because the boiling it and then reverse osmosis generally should treat most of the things that might be in the water. But yeah, if that's not working, then either bringing your own bottled water, which is just a good tip, or asking them to use it is certainly appropriate.
And I noticed that when I get a cup of chai, it's milk, that's been boiled, and I'm fine with that.
Interesting. Yeah.
For some reason, but it's just the water that I'm the most sensitive to. But thank you for that permission. I always ask, and then I just trust that, the response is honest, and we proceed from there, because I enjoy the teas. I don't want to miss out on enjoying the teas.
Yes. Yeah. I would say the thing I'd offer is to also carry probiotics, because that they do help in case that your stomach
Sure.
Dr. Connie, are you familiar with Berkey?
What's that?
Water filtration. It's gravity filtration, but the kind of things that they're able to get out of the water just using passive system, it's pretty amazing. fact, they use these systems for emergency use around the world
Ah,
when you need to get water out of like the river or whatever, drinking
okay,
water.
okay.
I don't have mine set up right now, but once I do, it's pretty much the only water that I'll drink. But just take tap water, throw it in, and pretty soon you've got a whole. But anyways, they have travel versions of it.
Okay, thank you.
So I put the name, yeah, someone
I
has that.
see. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
They're a little spendy, but I'd say they're worth it if water is critical.
Yeah. Yeah, we even have a water purifier in our home. You know, just we live in an urban environment and I just drink more water when it's filtered or bottled, you know. Enjoy it. I enjoy the taste. And you're right, Raj. I mean, the tea just tastes so lovely when it's been steeped in a clean water.
Well, it's yeah, and thanks for raising that, because water is the most important part of the tea experience, right? It's basically flavored water. That's what tea is. So it's worth making sure that you have good water, especially if you're really going to places to try their and usually most factories will have some bottled water on hand specifically.
Mhm.
It's a little hard with the amount of plastic. That's definitely the bummer to it all, but it's kind of a
I know.
necessary evil
Yes.
for staying healthy.
Raj, I have a blasphemous question.
Okay, go for it.
I'm a tea drinker who likes to add milk and sugar to it. That's the way I enjoy it the most, and I know that's not proper tasting, but do you have recommendations for how to best add milk and sugar to an Assam to still enjoy the Assam without losing it?
Yeah, I have to confess that I don't usually have it with milk and sugar, so I might actually defer to Mitra, my wife, who does.
Well, how do you use it right now?
Erin, how do you?
I typically put in the little bit of sweetener when it's steeping, and then just add a splash of, or a little bit more than a splash, depending on how strong the tea is, after it's finished steeping, and then that's how I typically enjoy it. But I always wonder, am I doing it in the wrong order? Am I supposed to use more or less of something in order to not lose the tea in the process?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's like whatever that works for your taste and whatever that you enjoy. And you can always adjust the ratio of like brew it stronger and add more milk, or, if you want to bring more flavor out. And of course, it's a type of milk too. If you use like whole milk, which is what I use, it's creamier. So it will actually work with the tea much better. Sometimes the lighter ones don't, but oat milk is really great. I mean, all of them work. It just matter of adjusting the amounts or brewing it harder and stronger if you want to get more out of it. But I don't think there is the sweetener personally I add at the end because I sometimes feel like I can adjust it better, when it's at the end, but yeah.
Oh, I will try that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Erin, I'm just thinking now that I've thought a bit more. The things that I do know that people really look for is the color. So using that, like adding a small amount, stirring it in, and then adding small, like starting with less milk rather than more. But yeah, like tea first and then diluting the tea with the milk. So using the color as a reference point for sort of fine tuning it to your personal taste. But then the other reason I think that's a good approach is because actually Mo, this other mentor we showed at the beginning, he actually used to work in coffee. He worked for Peet's Coffee for a long time. And there they were saying that there's a certain temperature above which the fats and milk start to break apart and you kind of lose what would help to bring up whether it's coffee bean flavor or tea flavor. I think the fats have some role to play. So not letting the milk get too hot is a way to ensure that it's not kind of taking away from the tea, which is in direct contrast to the Indian way of making chai, where they like literally, it's kind of saying, like boil it for a super long time. So his comment was like, I never really understood why that's the case, that like these chais have such a high amount of boiling. My guess is that it's also a bit of a sanitation thing to kill off any bacteria that might be in the milk. But yeah, if you've got a nice whole milk or something that's fairly fatty, not to let it get too hot. And I don't remember what the temperature is above which you want to keep it. I think for some reason 180 is coming to my head. But yeah, just preventing the milk from getting too hot before it gets added.
In the USA, for like if you're working in a cafeteria or wherever you're serving food, the number is 140 degrees. So you have to be above 140 to make sure that you're whatever.
Yeah,
kind of not bacteria free, but that it's not an issue.
That's right. Yep.
I wanted to also add a fun fact about the whole milk in first or tea in first, which is like an age a very big argument in Britain among this one or that one. There are different schools of thought. Very fun. And the milk in first was, the theory is that, and a lot of Brits still do that, is because it was cool milk, and in 17th, 18th century, when the tea had come there, they used porcelain from China, which was very delicate. So if you put hot tea over it, it would break. And so they would put the cool milk in first to kind of like ease the temperature, and then they would add the hot tea, and kind of that stuck around, and it's still being very fervently argued.
Thank you so much. This is all very helpful.
Question.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your advice. I'm trying it right now.
I guess we didn't call it, but for those who are making a second steep, I hope it's poured out. I just realized mine isn't, so I guess we'll find out results. I mentioned that you're supposed to steep it stronger than you want, right? But actually, surprisingly, it's not overdone. At least color-wise,
I'm gonna try to beat you to your first sip.
Yeah.
And that is the second. Oh, you beat me. The second cup. That's the second steep. I noticed that it's whatever it is that I can sense, it's a lot milder. So the palate cleansing effect is way reduced.
Yeah.
And if I could taste it, I'm sure it would be very nice and subtle and kind of comforting, as someone mentioned before.
Yeah. Yeah, for me on the second steep, even though I don't know if it's 20 minutes, it was a while. There's no astringency. It actually has gone. And so for me, there's almost this like menthol, camphor kind of like top notes that are much brighter and cleaner that I'm now tasting on the second steep than were there in the first. And they're probably there in the first, but maybe masked or covered up by some of the more punchy stuff that is kind of, I think, there in the beginning, but quick to fade.
I have a question. So sadly, I got here late, so I don't know if you've talked about what you've said about vessels, but at one point it was very expensive, a little pot that was I think it was a Chinese clay that was said, always use the same tea in that, and the oils seep in, and then that enhances the flavor. Well, unfortunately, I think my friend broke it and then would never admit it, but I don't have it anymore. It was my retirement present to myself. This is very sad. But are those worth the expense?
Yeah, so yes, those clay like yixing pots that are intended to be continually used and continually sort of layered with flavor. I think that for those who are really, if you drink enough tea regularly, it is worth the investment because it does become a different experience. I personally tried that for a couple of years and found it was like, this is just like a little bit more work because you have to use it continually. If it dries out, it kind of loses its flavor. A little bit like cast iron, right? Like if it doesn't stay oiled, it doesn't have the same quality. And so I think as long as you're willing to stay dedicated to really actually using it, it's worth it. But if you think it might be something you do for a little while, then it kind of gets stuck in the back of the cupboard for a couple months, then comes back out, then it might not be worth it. But they're beautiful. So even as a decoration, they're wonderful to have. We have a overflowing teaware collection. I think the hobbyist part of it is also a big part of enjoying it too. Yeah, but I hope you get a new one. I hope the second one enters your life.
Well, since I'm not going to retire again, I don't get to give myself any more retirement presents. So we'll see if I need a sugar daddy. Now on that note, I'll hush.
You know, Yunnan Sourcing, that's a company that has a lot of really fun teaware if you are looking for just some browsing to get inspired. Yunnan Sourcing.
Would you spell it?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Actually, Mitra, do you mind grabbing the URL and just putting it in? Thanks.
So when I'm in India, Raj, if I'm in Delhi, for example, the big place, you know, where is a place that everybody buys their tea?
Well, where everybody buys their tea and where I'd suggest are two different places.
Okay.
There's a beautiful little tea boutique called Happy Hunter.
Okay.
That's my favorite spot. It's near Hoskas Market, and run by a Japanese woman who moved to New Delhi and has just really, brought, I think, some of the best teas from India together.
Wow. Okay.
But where people go generally, because in India, you know, these type of, what we're saying, like these orthodox teas, the single origin teas, those aren't real. Those are really made more for export than for domestic consumption.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, CTCT is the tea of India, and India does consume 80% of what it makes, orthodox and CTCT.
Right.
A lot is being consumed within the country, but generally, you know, the teas that are available are just in grocery stores, or there are a few markets where you can go to like see the tea stalls and all. But I'd have to double check the name of it. I haven't been in a little bit in Delhi where that is. I can follow up with you to find the name.
Thank you.
But
yeah, when we were in Assam, they brought us to a place that where there was just only Assam. It wasn't really a
right.
visit the tea plant, you know, fields. It was just more like just a big lineup of people, you know, weighing and purchasing Assam tea only.
Yep. Great, Aaron. Well, thank you for joining. Yeah, and I know that if folks do need to drop off, please feel free, but we'll just hang out until we don't want to hang out anymore.
After you showed the map with Assam, then I looked on my phone so I could see exactly where that was. And I'm just wanting to know if you've ever thought about some of the surrounding areas. What would be is there any viability? Let's just say, for example, Manipur, which has a nice fertile valley, and then surrounded by hills. Do you suppose a place like that would have any promise if people were to say, "Oh, let's try doing tea here"?
Definitely, yes, and people are. It's kind of exciting that there is a lot more sort of smallholder farmers starting to organize and make their own tea operations in surrounding states. Sikkim is probably the furthest along. They're the first state in India to go 100% organic. Like all the agriculture that's produced in Sikkim is organic. And they've got one community-run operation called Temi Tea that's making pretty solid teas. We're actually just in touch with them right now about getting some samples because we're excited to see if we can support them and, well, of course, drink their teas. But so to your point, I do think that as Assam, as a region, moves towards being less viable in terms of long-term tea production, the surrounding areas will become more sought after and looked at, and people will begin to explore and experiment because it's 40% of Indian tea and the world's most productive tea region. So if it goes offline, there's going to be a huge hole in the market to fill because globally tea consumption is still increasing. So I think somebody's going to fill it. And the most logical things are the areas that are as similar to it as possible. I guess we didn't talk about this, but all of these teas come from the Camellia sinensis leaves, the leaves of the Camellia sinensis plant. But there's really two varietals, there's a fork in that species. Camellia sinensis var sinensis. Sinensis means of China. That was like the kind of first one that was first cultivated in Yunnan and then spread across the world. And then Camellia sinensis var assamica, which is indigenous to Assam, and which depends on who you ask where it started, but these two regions, the two origins of the two plants, are right across the Himalaya from each other. So one of the theories is that this plant has been growing in that part of the world before the mountains were there, and that as the Himalayas came up, it kind of like pushed the two apart. It's definitely the case that the Yunnan one was the first to get intentionally cultivated and spread. But the Assamica one, which is lower elevation, broader leaf, the tea plant is a tree if it let grow into its full size, and the Assamica one is the bigger one. It gets to about 50 feet 50 feet high versus about 30 feet with the Chinese variety. So all that plays into sort of the viability of a region is kind of tied to the cultivar and the way that the tea farmers are adapting their cultivation practices to changing weather. So yeah, I guess that's almost my favorite part of the whole tea experience, is that it really at the end of the day is the leaves of a plant, and understanding the ways that that plant is in a dynamic ecosystem and the way it's changing is one of the more interesting things that we're all a part of. Like the way we drink tea today is going to be different than the teas that we drink in 20 years from now. So yeah, this is a snapshot in time of tea, representative of a snapshot of a lot of things that are changing in the world right now.
Raj, are there any quality teas grown in the US at all?
Yeah, there are actually, and increasingly so. There's the one that I'm the most familiar with, because in Oregon, they've been at it the longest, is the Minto Island tea growers. They're outside of Salem, Oregon. And yeah, they've been growing tea, I think, since the 70s. And we tried this year's harvests at the Portland Tea Festival in July, and they're phenomenal. So it is exciting to see that. There's another one in Mississippi, the Great Mississippi Tea Company. I haven't tried their teas in a little while, but they put a lot of effort into researching and developing it. And actually, Nigel Milliken, that same gentleman, he's consulting for them on how to set up their operation. So it's beginning to be explored. There's also a league that they call it the League of US Tea Growers, or the US League of Tea Growers, I think is the title. And the president is right in Eugene, Oregon. And they're trying to organize a bit. And that's the sort of independent effort. There's also UC Davis. They've started the Global Tea Institute to help develop tea as a commercially viable good in the US. And I guess they were very involved with the development of California's wine industry. So there's a lot of excitement for what they might be able to help support. The challenge with US grown tea is the cost and the yield, because tea is a very labor intensive crop. The best teas are hand harvested, and the bushes, are regularly visited by the tea farmers. And so, this is one of the things that's changing. Yeah, thanks, Dave and Kate. Great to see you. Is that the rates that farmers are paid in India, in China, in Nepal, and other places make the cost that we're used, that kind of sets the standard for what we're used to buying tea for now. American tea is, by comparison, way more expensive. And the amount that's being able to produce because of the growing conditions are also so far a lot less, because the expertise to cultivate these teas, which taken centuries, if not millennia to develop, isn't really local yet, or isn't domestic. So I think there's promise and there's people experimenting. I think it'll be a while before we can readily get this good quality tea at a price that most people can afford anytime in the near future. But it's certainly it's a fun thing to sample and to try and to see the way it is shaping. They had a white, a green, and a black they were making at Minto Island. And I remember the green was phenomenal.
Now I have two questions.
Uh-huh.
One being, thank you, Mitra, for that link. I went to that source. Almost all of those pots, it said sold out, except, of course, the most expensive one. But which made me wonder, is this a dying art because it's such a specialized thing? Are these going to be around and even available for a while? And I'll throw in my second question, which you may have already answered. Does the second steep have any less caffeine? Two questions.
Gotcha. Maybe start with the second one first. Caffeine is a very complicated question, and maybe Mitra, while you're in the URL world, can you grab our blog? We have a blog on
Yes.
tea because it's a really complicated thing that depends on the cultivar, the way it's steeped, the way it's processed. Everything plays into it. Yes, the second cup should have less because caffeine is released into the cup basically as soon as hot water hits it, but it will still have caffeine in it. I've seen a study to show that basically the amount of caffeine that's released over time decreases pretty linearly, pretty much like a straight line. But even from 5 to 10 minutes in, which is probably like what the second steep would be the equivalent of, there is still not a huge amount. I'm going to just like, so let's say these aren't numbers that I've researched, but I'm remembering the shape of the graph. And I felt like, 10 to 20% of what was ending up in the cup came in the 5 to 10 minute range. So it's not caffeine free, but it's going to have a lot less. And your first question is it a dying art? Well, it's interesting because in the US right now, specialty tea is really taking off for the first time, like matcha being something that people are familiar with, and pu'er and oolongs and those styles, and the teaware that accompany it is very much part of the consumption. So I think if if the US consumer wants it, there will be people who are making it. But I do think that it is the case that the people who really have, the artistry part of it is a question mark. Our focus is very much on Indian and Nepali teas, where the teaware doesn't have the same tradition and history. The cupping set is almost the closest thing to a formal teaware that is associated with Indian tea, but the Chinese and Japanese and Taiwanese, we'd have to ask our friends there to weigh in on if the tea art, the ceramicists and people making the teaware, what's happening. I imagine, like many things, that people are probably moving towards more lucrative, probably tech-based jobs, but I couldn't say for sure. Mitra, were you going to weigh in?
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in about Yunnan sourcing specifically. They have sold out things all the time because they bring things from China directly, and a lot of times, with like sourcing and everything, they have ups and downs. So they bring a bunch, they sell out, and then bring. So I would just, particularly with them, keep an eye on things. And if you see something you like, jump on it, because it does sell out pretty quickly, because I think their inventory isn't huge, or maybe it is, I don't know, but they sell out fast. So, yeah.
And we are coming up on time here, so I know people might have other obligations. So I do want to just say thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is fun, and I hope we all learned a little something. I will send a recording of this video if you want to revisit it, as well as the links to the couple of things that we talked about by email. And yeah, we'll do another one in December. This is the first time it's more educational focused, so I'd welcome any input you have on what worked and what didn't. And yeah, just glad to be part of a community with you all, and to drink tea and to enjoy and take delight in the experience, because that's the best part of it all. It's the people, it's not the tea.
Thanks so much, Raj. It was really a pleasure talking tea for 90 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
And nice to meet you, Wendy. It was great to meet you. We've heard
you too. You too.
Yes.
And just to say what huge emotional support good tea is. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, my commitment to your company,